The torches are still wet with Caligula's blood when the real work begins. It's past midnight, January 24th, 41 AD. The emperor's body lies cooling in that narrow corridor, 30 stab wounds marking the end of Rome's most terrifying ruler. But in the imperial archives beneath the Palatine hill, a different kind of violence is unfolding. Men in senatorial togas are running through corridors they've never been allowed to enter. Their hands are shaking, their eyes are wild. They're not looking for gold or jewels, they're looking for paper, scrolls, ledgers, documents bearing their own names. One senator finds a room filled floor to ceiling with records. He opens a scroll at random and his face goes white. He drops it like it's on fire. Another man is already building a pyre in the courtyard. Flames lick at parchment that contains dates, transactions, descriptions of acts so systematic, so calculated, so meticulously recorded, that even these men who watched gladiators die for sport, men who crucified slaves without blinking, decide that no one can ever know what's written here. By dawn, an entire wing of the archive is ash. Think about that for a moment. Rome wasn't squeamish. This was a civilization that fed people to lions as lunch entertainment. They displayed severed heads on rostrums. They perfected torture as a legal procedure. And yet something in those scrolls was so disturbing that the most powerful men in the empire spent the night of their liberation not celebrating, but burning evidence. What could possibly be worse than what Rome already did in daylight? That's the question that haunted me. Because here's what the official histories tell us. Caligula was mad. Caligula was cruel. Caligula did terrible things. End of story. But the official histories were written after the purge. They were written by men who had every reason to minimize, to sanitize, to blame everything on one man's insanity rather than examine the system that enabled him. The convenient narrative is that Caligula was a monster and Rome was his victim. But monsters don't keep ledgers. Madmen don't build bureaucracies. Whatever Caligula created was organized enough to require archives, systematic enough to need accountants, and dangerous enough that destroying the evidence took priority over everything else. Fortunately for history, unfortunately for our sleep, the purge wasn't complete. Fragments survived. Whispers passed between families for generations. Writers like Suetonius and Cassius Dio gathered accounts from people who remembered, people who couldn't forget. And from these scattered pieces, we can reconstruct 5 secrets that Rome tried desperately to erase. 5 truths so dark that an empire built on conquest and blood decided they were too dangerous to remember. Before we dive deeper into this descent, make sure to help this small channel grow. Hit the like button and subscribe to Requiem of Thrones so you never miss any of our darker historical explorations. The first secret Rome tried to bury starts on a beautiful island. Capri, crystal blue waters, stunning cliffs, the kind of place you'd expect emperors to retire. But between 31 and 37 AD, Capri was something else entirely. Tiberius had transformed it into his personal laboratory of human suffering, and for 6 years, a teenage boy named Caligula lived at the center of it. The official story is simple. Young Caligula was a hostage, a survivor. He kept his head down, played the fool, and waited for the old monster to die. Historians love this narrative because it explains everything that came later as a trauma response. The poor boy witnessed horrors, and those horrors broke something inside him. Except the ancient sources tell a different story. Suetonius writes that Caligula never showed the slightest sign of distress. Not once. In 6 years of living with the man who murdered his entire family, Caligula never slipped, never grieved, never showed a single flash of the rage that must have been boiling inside him. That's not survival, that's performance. And performances require practice. The whispered accounts from Capri paint a picture Rome desperately wanted to forget. Caligula didn't just witness Tiberius's cruelties, he participated. He learned. When Tiberius grew bored with a particular victim, it was young Caligula who suggested new variations. When prisoners were brought to the island for the emperor's entertainment, Caligula watched with the clinical attention of a student studying under a master. He asked questions, he took mental notes, he experimented. There are fragments suggesting Caligula was given his own subjects to practice on. Slaves with no names, prisoners with no families, people who wouldn't be missed. The old emperor would watch these sessions the way a proud teacher watches a gifted pupil, and Caligula delivered. He learned which techniques produced fear without unconsciousness. He learned how to break someone's spirit while keeping their body functional. He learned that the anticipation of pain was often more effective than pain itself. By the time Tiberius died, Caligula hadn't spent 6 years hiding. He'd spent 6 years in the most intensive education in psychological warfare the ancient world could provide. Every technique he would later use on Rome's senators, every system of degradation he would build, every method of breaking human beings while keeping them alive and compliant, he learned it all on that island. The man who left Capri in 37 AD wasn't a traumatized survivor finally free from his tormentor. He was a graduate, fully trained, deeply practiced, and finally ready to implement everything he'd learned on a much larger scale. Rome wanted us to believe Caligula was born evil or driven mad. The truth is more disturbing. He was educated, and the empire that celebrated his arrival had no idea they were welcoming a student who had just completed his apprenticeship under the greatest monster of all, the age. But Capri was just the foundation. What happened next reveals how Caligula tested the limits of his new power. 7 months into his reign, Caligula collapsed. The fever came fast and brutal. Court physicians documented temperatures that should have killed him, convulsions so violent that multiple guards had to hold him down, delirious episodes where he claimed Jupiter himself was speaking through him. Rome held its breath. Priests sacrificed animals day and night. Citizens lined up to offer their own lives if the gods would spare their beloved emperor. For weeks, the empire teetered on the edge of mourning. And then he woke up, different, changed. The madness had begun. That's the story everyone knows, the convenient story. The story that lets us blame everything that followed on a mysterious illness that rewired his brain. But there are problems with this narrative. Big ones. Consider the timing. For 6 years on Capri, Caligula had played the perfect survivor. Obedient, harmless, entertaining. Then for 7 months as emperor, he played the perfect ruler. Tax cuts, public games, freed prisoners, beloved by all. 2 distinct performances, both executed flawlessly. And we're supposed to believe that a fever accidentally transformed him into something entirely new? Or consider what happened immediately after his recovery. His first act wasn't random violence, it was strategic. He ordered that every statue of every god in Rome should have its head replaced with his own likeness. Think about what that command actually tests. It tests whether anyone will refuse. It tests how far religious tradition can be bent by imperial power. It tests the limits of Roman obedience. That's not madness, that's an experiment. The ancient sources preserve a rumor that Rome tried hard to suppress. Some whispered that the illness wasn't natural at all, that Caligula had poisoned himself deliberately, just enough to nearly die, just enough to give himself permission to stop, pretending. Because here's what the sickness accomplished. It created a before and after. It gave Rome an explanation for the monster that was about to emerge. Poor Caligula, they could say. He was so good before the fever. The illness changed him. He's not responsible for what he does now. The sickness was a mask, a theatrical device. From that point forward, every atrocity could be blamed on divine madness rather than calculated choice. And Caligula exploited this mercilessly. He would reference his special connection to Jupiter. He would remind senators that the gods spoke through him now. He built a system where questioning his actions meant questioning divine will itself. The man who emerged from that sickbed wasn't broken. He was finally free. Free from the performance of sanity. Free from the expectations of a grateful public. free to implement everything he had learned on Capri, but now with the ultimate excuse already in place. If anyone objected, if anyone pointed out the horror of what he was doing, Caligula could simply smile. The fever, you understand. I'm not quite myself anymore. It was the perfect cover for the perfect predator. And Rome never suspected that they were watching a performance until the stage was already covered in blood. But the illness was just the beginning. What Caligula built next would require something far more organized than madness could ever explain. Everyone knows about the imperial brothel, the palace rooms where senators' wives and daughters were forced to serve. The price lists were announced in the streets, the humiliation designed to break Rome's aristocracy. But beneath that horror was something worse. Something so systematic that Claudius made burning these specific records his first priority as emperor. Not the financial ledgers, not the execution orders, the breeding documents. Fragments that survived the purge describe a program that went far beyond degradation. Caligula wasn't just violating noble families for entertainment, he was collecting them, cataloging them, selecting them for specific purposes based on bloodline, physical characteristics, and fertility assessments. Imperial physicians were ordered to examine women and girls with clinical precision. Their findings were recorded in dedicated ledgers. Age, health, family lineage going back generations, estimated capacity for bearing children. These weren't random examinations. They were inventories. The women deemed most suitable were separated from others. They weren't just used once and discarded. They were kept, monitored. And when pregnancies resulted, those pregnancies were tracked with the same meticulous attention Rome applied to census records and tax collection. Every conception dated. Every birth is documented. Every child was catalogued and removed. Where did those children go? The sources become fragmentary here, deliberately so. But the pattern suggests something horrifying. Infants born of this program were taken from their mothers immediately. They were placed with selected families or raised in imperial facilities away from Rome. They were never told their origins. Their mothers were forbidden to speak of them in pain of death. These children would grow up Roman citizens, perhaps even nobles themselves, carrying bloodlines manipulated by imperial design, never knowing they were products of a state-run breeding operation. Some historians estimate dozens of children. Others suggest hundreds over the course of Caligula's reign. We'll never know the true number because Claudius ensured we wouldn't. The breeding ledgers were the first documents he demanded, not requested. Demanded. Hours after taking power, while senators were still debating the future of Rome, Claudius had men searching the archives for these specific records. When they were found, he didn't read them publicly. He didn't use them as evidence of his predecessors' crimes. He burned them personally, watched them turn to ash, and never spoke of their contents. Why? The obvious answer is that the records contained names. Senators who had participated, families who had been complicit, perhaps even names of the children themselves, now scattered across the empire with no knowledge of what they were. But there's a darker possibility. What if Claudius burned those records because the program was too effective to expose? What if revealing the truth would have meant identifying children who had already been placed in powerful families? What if the bloodlines Caligula had manipulated were already too entangled with Rome's future to untangle? The children of the breeding program grew up, they married, they had children of their own. For generations afterward, Roman nobles may have carried blood from Caligula's experiments without ever knowing it. And the evidence that could have identified them was deliberately reduced to ashes. But even the breeding program required cooperation. And that brings us to the fourth secret Rome tried hardest to forget. You've probably wondered why nobody stopped him. Rome had 600 senators, wealthy men, powerful men, men who commanded legions and governed provinces. Any one of them could have hired an assassin. Any group of them could have organized a coup. So why did they sit through years of humiliation, watching their wives violated, their daughters degraded, their sons feminized and auctioned, without lifting a single finger against the man responsible? The answer was a document, and destroying it was worth more to the Senate than avenging their families. The sources call it different things: a registry, a confession, a ledger of participation, but the details that survive the purge paint a consistent picture. Caligula had created a master document that contained the signature of every sitting senator in Rome. Not just their names, their confessions, written in their own hands. Describing in clinical detail exactly what they had witnessed, what they had allowed, and what they had personally participated in. The genius was in how he collected them. It started small. A senator would be summoned to a banquet. Something would happen, not to him, to someone else. And afterward, Caligula would present a document. You were present tonight. Sign here, confirming what you witnessed. Just a formality. Administrative record keeping. Most signed without thinking. They were witnesses, not participants. What was the harm? But the documents accumulated, and the events escalated. Soon senators were signing confessions that described them holding torches during rituals, providing their own family members as participants, actively facilitating acts they could never publicly admit to. Each signature was collected, verified, and added to the master registry. Each man's handwriting, each man's seal, each man's admission of guilt. The document became Caligula's ultimate insurance policy. Any senator who considered moving against him knew that his confession existed. If Caligula fell, if someone else took power, that document could surface. Every shameful secret, every complicit act, every moment of cowardice immortalized in his own handwriting. His family would know. His descendants would know. History would know. Not that he was a victim of tyranny, but that he helped make tyranny possible. This is why the conspiracy that killed Caligula came from the Praetorian Guard, not the Senate. The soldiers had no signatures on that document. They had nothing to lose. But the senators? They had everything to lose, and they knew it. The moment Caligula stopped breathing, the race began. Senators who had spent years being too afraid to act suddenly found extraordinary courage. They tore through the imperial archives like men possessed. They weren't looking for treasure. They weren't looking for evidence against Caligula. They were looking for evidence against themselves. The document had to be found before Claudius could use it, before anyone could use it, before the full scope of senatorial complicity could become public record. Whether they found it, whether Claudius found it first and used it as leverage, whether it was successfully destroyed or simply hidden, we'll never know. But the scramble itself tells us everything. These men weren't liberating Rome from a tyrant. They were destroying the proof that they had helped build his tyranny. And that desperation points us toward the final secret, because Caligula wasn't killed for what he had done. He was killed for what he was about to do. Here's what doesn't make sense about Caligula's assassination. He had been cruel for nearly 4 years. 4 years of systematic humiliation, 4 years of violated wives and degraded daughters, 4 years of senators smiling through their own destruction. And suddenly, in January of 41 AD, a group of men decided they'd had enough. After everything Rome had already endured, what changed? The answer wasn't what Caligula had done. It was what he was about to do. Accounts that survived the purge reference a document that circulated among the conspirators in the weeks before the assassination, not the confession registry. Something else. A list. Names of senators, generals, provincial governors, entire noble families, organized not randomly but systematically. Categories, timetables, methods. Caligula wasn't planning more of the same. He was planning a complete restructuring of Roman power, and the men who killed him weren't on the safe side of that list. Think about what Caligula had built by 41 AD. He had the confession document ensuring senatorial compliance. He had the breeding program creating future loyalists with manipulated bloodlines. He had broken the spirit of Rome's aristocracy so thoroughly that they thanked him for their own humiliation. The system was working perfectly. So why would he need to eliminate anyone? Because the system had a flaw. The senators were broken, but they were still there. Their families still held wealth. Their names still commanded respect in the provinces. Their sons still grew up hearing whispered stories of what had been done to their mothers and sisters. Caligula understood that broken men can still breed revenge. A humiliated senator might smile and nod for the rest of his life, but his grandson might not. The hatred would compound across generations. The only way to ensure permanent security was elimination, not just of the men, but of their bloodlines entirely. The list reportedly organized targets by threat level. First tier, senators whose families had shown any sign of resistance, however small. Second tier, military commanders with enough popularity to potentially rally legions. Third tier, wealthy families whose resources could fund future opposition. Each name had associated names: wives, children, extended relatives. Caligula wasn't planning executions. He was planning extinctions. Cassius Chaerea, the Praetorian officer who struck the first blow, had seen the list. His name wasn't on it, but he understood what it meant. If Caligula succeeded in eliminating Rome's noble families, the Praetorian Guard would lose their patrons, their connections, and their path to power after military service. The senators who joined the conspiracy had seen it too, or heard about it, or simply understood that after 4 years of escalation, the next phase could only be annihilation. The assassination wasn't justice. It wasn't liberation. It wasn't brave men finally standing up against tyranny. It was self-preservation dressed as heroism. The conspirators killed Caligula because they were running out of time. A few more weeks, maybe a few more days, and the eliminations would have begun. They weren't heroes who had finally had enough. They were dead men who refused to stay dead. The list was never found, or it was found and destroyed so thoroughly that no fragment survived. But its existence explains everything about the timing, the desperation, and the violence of that January afternoon. And what came after tells us the most disturbing truth of all. The fires burned for 3 days. Archives that had taken years to build were reduced to ash in less than a week. When the smoke finally cleared, Rome told itself a comforting story. The monster was dead. The evidence was destroyed. The nightmare was over. But here's what that story leaves out. Claudius didn't just burn the records. He read them first. The new emperor spent hours in those archives before ordering their destruction. Slaves reported seeing him hunched over scrolls by lamplight, taking notes, asking questions about procedures and systems and methods. He wasn't destroying evidence of crimes. He was studying a manual. And when he finally gave the order to burn, he kept certain documents for himself: administrative structures, organizational charts, the mechanics of how Caligula's machine actually functioned. Think about what happened to Rome after Caligula died. Did the empire become kinder? Did the systematic cruelty end? Claudius executed dozens of senators during his reign. His wife Messalina ran operations from the palace that historians still debate how to describe. And Nero, Claudius's successor, would make Caligula look almost restrained by comparison. The techniques evolved. The methods were refined. But the blueprint remained intact. Caligula's true legacy wasn't the specific horrors he committed. It was proof that such horrors were possible. He demonstrated that an entire civilization could be bent to serve one man's cruelty, that bureaucracy could normalize atrocity, that fear and complicity could replace law and tradition. Every emperor who followed him knew this was possible because Caligula had already done it. The boundaries had been tested, the limits had been mapped, the instruction manual existed even if most copies had been burned, and this raises the question that haunts me most. What we know about Caligula comes from fragments, whispers, accounts written decades later by men working from memory and rumor. the systematic breeding program, the confession registry, the successor list. These survived only partially, in hints and implications and passages that later copyists found too disturbing to preserve completely. If this is what survived the purge, what was successfully erased? What secrets were so dark that not even fragments remain? Roman archaeology continues to this day. Excavations beneath the Palatine hill, discoveries in the buried cities around Vesuvius, archives in monasteries, where monks copied ancient texts without fully understanding what they were preserving. Every few years, something new surfaces. A fragment here, a reference there. Pieces of a puzzle that's been scattered for 2,000 years. Maybe we found everything. Maybe the purge was thorough enough that the worst secrets died with the men who kept them. But consider this. Caligula ruled for 3 years, 9 months, and 8 days. In that time, he built a machine sophisticated enough to require dedicated archives, specialized staff, and systematic record keeping. We know about 5 secrets that Rome tried to erase. We have fragments suggesting dozens more. And we have 3 days of burning to account for, thousands of scrolls, entire wings of archives reduced to ash. The real question isn't what Caligula did. The real question is what we still don't know. And whether somewhere, buried in the earth or hidden in a forgotten archive, the complete truth is still waiting.